What's up, Cam?
Howdy, howdy. The wrong slide popped up.
All right. Welcome back to another AppSheet training live stream. This week, we're talking about AppSheet data best practices.
Let's go.
It's one of my favorite subjects. Me and Cam were just talking backstage as the live stream, before the live stream began. And I love talking about databases. Feels very like scientific, mathematical.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we'll save the small talk for later, and we're going to jump right into our session today, so we can get you guys the content. So I'm Austin Skidmore. I'll be your host, joined with Cameron Lumpton. He's going to be our Google developer expert walking through the session today. And just a quick overview of the agenda. We did our intros. Our main topic for today is AppSheet data best practices. So he's going to go over all the things that you need to know and what we recommend, and as in terms of database design and everything like that. And then if you have questions, feel free to leave those in the chat and stick around to the end to learn more. Again, these sessions are powered by Crew Technologies. But with that, let's pass it over to Cam and he'll get us started.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and switch the next slide right over here.
All right.
And first, we want to talk about creating standards within your database. And that really starts with naming conventions and particularly how you space stuff, how you case your header names, your column names, and that just means like uppercase, lowercase, so on. And just straight up, our recommendation is snake case. That comes with obviously a million different caveats. Everything that you see on the screen right here is fine for AppSheet. And so right here, we talk about snake case, which is all lowercase. And then each word is delineated by a underscore. So instead of using a space, you utilize an underscore. There's other conventions that are, we say are generally good for AppSheet, and that is Pascal case and camel case. Pascal case and camel case are very similar in the sense of you capitalize the first letter of each word. However, the first word in camel case does not receive a capitalization. We'll talk about in a second why these are good and why something like just like normal casing is just okay for AppSheet. So with AppSheet, it's not going to care too much between which of these ones you use. And that's because AppSheet is very friendly. AppSheet is made for a no-code audience, so they've been very lenient on what is capable to use as your column names. Technically, you can use symbols and you can use spaces, and AppSheet is very lenient. But if you're wanting to build these apps at scale, if you're wanting to utilize things like JavaScript, or if you're wanting to utilize things like app scripts, like Google App Scripts or Python, or if you want to connect to a SQL database eventually, it is good to begin to adopt more traditional programming database naming. And so we'll get into situations where you fall into more issues in the future. But like right off the bat, this one that I say is okay for AppSheet, that's just saying first name with spaces, how you would write it out in English, saying last name, saying email, so on. The reason why this is okay for AppSheet is because AppSheet allows it. But if you were to bring this into SQL and you were to begin to write some sort of query, it would not like that there's a space in between first and last name. And so if I were to say like, oh, I want this column from this table, then there would be a space in between the column name, and it wouldn't know how to process that. So you would actually have to put tick marks on each side in order to make it recognize it as one single column. And then other things that are like generally good. A lot of times within like Python and other programming languages, you'll see that camel case is usually utilized for variables. And so sometimes just being able to see that variable and that database name under two different naming conventions allow you to clearly see that one is a variable, one is a column name, and so on. But all that to say, we think the easiest one is snake case. We think that is a good standard. However, if you're just using AppSheet, this one is fine, where you just are typing it normally. You're not adding symbols. You're capitalizing where you want to capitalize, where it makes sense. And the pro behind this is that you don't need to set display names. If you are using first name, last name, like we see right here, and you bring it into AppSheet, you're going to have to go into the display name of each one of those and type out first name. You're going to have to retype the actual display name for each one. And so that can be a tedious setup step. But if you're wanting to scale up this data to other systems in the future, it's definitely worth those quick display names.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any questions or any comments about conventions?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention like it's probably obvious, but just one of the things to note too on the recommendation is usually like when an end user is using the app, if you name it with our recommendation, you'll have to go through and do the display names for each of the columns.
Yeah.
But it is still the best practice. But that's just something I've noticed as I've started moving a lot of my backend data systems over to SQL. It's like,
Yeah.
unless you do a view in SQL. What I don't know if we want to get into that, but what are your thoughts on like, should you just connect directly to the SQL table or create a view?
It depends on what your app requires. So, we had a project with Google, and it required a production application and a development application.
Yeah.
And with that, we used a production database and a dev database. And so instead of having two different tables that we're connecting into, we had a column inside of it saying, is this production or is this dev data? And so we had two separate views. We had a live and a prod and a dev view.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Table. Yeah. So it's almost like putting in a slice
like
on the SQL. And then so that they would always have the same schema. But they wouldn't we wouldn't fill up the live database with dev data of us testing.
Right.
Yeah. And so
it's almost like when you're
good practice. I think it can be good practice to use a view instead of a table within AppSheet when you're connecting it, especially if you are changing the schema, because your views don't have to have the full schema of the table. And so if you're adding a column to the table, you can postpone you adding that column to the view until you're ready to integrate the app.
Right.
So, yeah, all that to say, these are the naming conventions that are generally good. Next, we're going to talk about things that you would likely want to avoid. So there is something called kebab case. So you can imagine a shish kebab, and you got a skewer going through it, and you got all your meat and your veggies and stuff. That's what you can think of when you think of this. It uses hyphens or dashes. The reason why you would not want to use this is because that little hyphen right there is also the subtraction operator within almost every programming language. And so it would want to try to either subtract name from first, either the column name from first or the variable name from first, depending on the language and stuff. And so every single time you would use this outside of AppSheet, you would have to wrap it in tick marks or quotation marks based off of the language. And so that just takes
some extra
time, and it's just not a good standard. It potentially makes your code or your queries less readable because you scan over it and you miss that that's a column instead of a math operation of subtracting one thing from another. Another one thing that we don't suggest is prefixing the table before the column. Whenever we create tables within AppSheet and within our database, we want the table to be every single record to be an entity, and every single column to be a characteristic of that entity. So if we have a work order table, we want every record to be one work order. And then we want the name of that work order just to be name, not like WO name. By context of where you are, you should have the awareness of essentially WO or work. This is the work order's name. But the reason why we suggest not using this is sometimes you have tables where they share the same initial. And so you then begin to have to do like, oh, for user, I'm going to do US. But for this other thing that starts with U, I'm going to have to do UP or something. And then whenever you're actually doing programming, when you're actually doing AppSheet, you have to think, this table is US underscore first name. And so it just becomes an additional thing you have to think about. That is not something that needs to slow you down. It's already, that first name is already in context of the user table. And so underscoring it with the U is not necessary. There's also a thing called Hungarian notation. In a lot of programming languages, variables require a specific type, a specific data type, and you can't change that. And it was standard practice previously to add the data type into the variable name. And some of that had transferred over into database standards, and that's just not necessary for AppSheet. Especially saying that the majority of usage of the database is not going to happen through the database itself, but through AppSheet. And you're going to be using data types within AppSheet that automatically tie it to the correct data type and so on. For the same reason as kebab case, I would suggest not using symbols. Different symbols in different programming languages are just used differently. And in AppSheet and stuff, are used differently, and so it just makes it more legible to keep symbols out of your columns. And it keeps you from having to do a whole lot of shift and then raising up your fingers to the numbers. But ultimately, the most important thing, other than having maybe one of these like okay standards, the most important thing is just being consistent. The thing you want to avoid is being inconsistent. Of having a database name, having a column name that is snake case, and then having Pascal case, and then having to like keep that like technical debt in your brain at all time that you filter through while you're typing expressions of that one has capital S and this one has a lowercase s in this snake case. It just slows down your development. And so I would just say stay consistent, choose a naming convention early, a casing convention early, and you should be great. I think that is all for these slides, but I will go ahead and open up a new sheet. So I'll just go to sheets.new. And let's talk a little bit about how we, particularly like what names do we choose for columns. First, we want to talk about how we name tables. So the standard for naming tables, I'm going to use for the rest of this video, snake case. But the standard for naming a table within database engineering is to make it a singular, to name it after a singular record. And so instead of saying work orders, you would say work order. And we are adopting snake case. So it would be like this. So you are determining that the table is named after a single record. All right. And then within AppSheet, you're going to want to keep all your headers at the very top. We are using Google Sheets in this instance to simulate a SQL database. That's just what AppSheet likes, is SQL structured databases. Also, we'll go ahead and just name this after what the app could be. So we could say crew CRM, and then I'll add the word demo. And so for a work order, we like to use ID. Sometimes some programming languages don't like just ID, and you can use something like WO ID. I just use ID always, personally.
Yeah. Our director of DevOps, he likes the like primary key, or he likes adding the primary key convention, and then when you have a foreign key, add the FK foreign key.
Yeah, so that's another standard of PK.
Yeah.
Of just doing PK for primary key or PK underscore ID or something like that.
I think we do PK and then the table name. I think.
Okay, like so PK work order.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great convention also. And it's very clear for people who are coming into the database and working in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
table name first and then PK.
Okay, so
yeah,
just like that.
Yeah,
is what Ben likes. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Most times I honestly just use ID, and it does me great. But next we want to focus on just if we were to add a work order name. We're wanting to not prefix with like work order name like this. or we don't want to say work order name like the PK. We just want to say name. We know that this is the name in context of the work order table. So we can say name, we can say status. We don't want work order status. We see that a lot within apps that we help people with, is that they'll say like, oh, this ticket, this IT ticket, they'll say like ticket status. And it's like, we know it's this ticket status. You're just making yourself type extra. And whenever you like are doing an AppSheet expression, you're saying like select ticket status. And I don't know, just feels redundant. And then next, if we were to have a reference to who is the owner of this work order, there's two different ways you would do this. And a lot of times people would suggest user underscore ID. So the table name. So table underscore ID, and that would be a ref to the user table for like the owner of this work order. But a gripe with this is like, what if you have a lead and a backup for this, and you can't just say like user ID again. And so another thing that people do is like owner ID, or they just state what is the relationship of that column. They're just the owner. So really, I think you can do any of these three of like, who is the owner of this app? You can say user ID, owner ID, or like owner. And then also with foreign keys, like whenever you're setting up a ref, I think it's synonymous with using the word ref. And then we also talked about how our director of DevOps likes using FK to signify that this is a foreign key. I think any of those three naming conventions are great.
Nice.
And we'll talk more about that in a second. So we'll just go ahead and say user, or we'll say owner ID.
Yeah.
Or owner ref. And then next we want to talk about, there's most tables will be work order, like just like that plain. But imagine we had a student table, and then we had a course table. So we have a table of all the students in the school, and we have a list of all the courses in the school. And then we want a many-to-many table. And that is like saying Austin is enrolled into this course. And so for that, we would need a ID. So let's just call this blah for now before I name it. This one would need an ID, and then it would need a student ref. Student. A student ref.
Is this like an intermediate table?
Yeah, it's a many-to-many table. So it's saying that this student is enrolled to this course. So it has two refs, and it's connecting a course and a student together. And then we can record additional things of like what period is the student enrolled to this class for. He's fourth period. What year were they enrolled to this class? Let's say 2025. Who is the teacher for this course that they're doing? Mr. Skidmore. He actually used to be a teacher.
That's right.
So
yeah.
And so
I did a similar thing for like that lesson that you did. I think it was last week, our last series over resource sharing. I used a similar method to like share resources with people.
Gotcha. Yeah. So this is called a many-to-many table. It connects a relationship of two entities together to create one entity. And what this is creating for us is an enrollment entity. It is establishing that this student is enrolled to this course. And the way that you want to name these tables, there's two different names that we call them. We can call them students and then course. And that just says it is the marriage of a student and a course. Or you can name it after what the entity is, which is an enrollments. Whenever a student and course are combined in one of these records, it is declaring an enrollments. And so we can name it either an enrollment or a student course. You can also think of this as if instead of student course, this could be customer and product. And you can say like quantity, price, total. This one you could call customer product, customer underscore product, or you could call it cart item. This is an item inside of the cart. This customer has these products in their cart.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. So that is a lot of the naming conventions that we stand by. I'm gonna undo this back to student course. Cool. But that is a lot of the naming conventions that we operate with in Crew and that we suggest at within AppSheet. But let's go ahead and create a little bit of a student table. So we'll say ID. I'll use ID. I'll use first name, and we'll move quick. I know that we're getting close to the end. Last name, and then we'll say birth date, and we'll say that's good for that. For course, we'll say this course is ID. Course name is an active course, yes or no. So one thing I like to do within here is I like to grab the header column, make it bold, add a background color, and I like to choose the lightest one. So I'll choose red for student, and then I like to go into here and change that to the darker version of red, just like that. And I know that these columns are all regarding this red student tab. And then I like to go to course. Let's choose green. And I like to capture all these, make the lightest form of green, hit bold. And so we know that everything right here is the header column. We could also choose to like freeze the column where it's always at the top. But yeah. And then we have this enrollment table right here. And let's say enrollments are going to be yellow. So we'll make it yellow. And then we'll take this whole column, make it yellow, and make it bold. Obviously, this isn't a thing in SQL. This is mostly what I like to do for Google Sheets. But we can also see that this right here is a reference to student. And so I like to take this reference to the table that is red and make it red like that. And it just allows me to visualize that this is a ID, a reference outside of this table, and it's not necessarily a it just helps me visualize. So I like to do that one green for course ref because it's green, and so on.
Nice.
Do you ever do anything like that, Austin?
I did a little bit. I usually I don't do the color coding too much anymore, but I do the bold when I'm in Google Sheets, and I'll freeze the row. And for whatever reason, I'll always freeze the row and then the header row and then column A, just because it's always the ID, but it just feels right.
So. Yeah. I'm going to talk pretty quickly about some other things. First, I want to talk about formulas inside your Google Sheet or your Excel document. I extremely limit usage of sheets and Excel formulas whenever the app is connected to that sheet or Excel document. And that's because we want that logic to be built inside of AppSheet. Whenever we create a record in AppSheet, ideally we want that value to be updated by AppSheet. And so altogether, it just makes it simpler to understand when things are coming in. If it's a formula, it's got to push that data to Google Sheet, and then Google Sheet updates that formula, and then it comes back with the live data of that. It's easier just to have that as a calculation that's being done within AppSheet. Obviously, you can have a separate tab that's not connected to AppSheet that has formulas running on these other things. If you want to do some sort of like pivot table that's joining student courses enrollments, that way it's getting all the information in one pivot table or something like that, you can definitely do that on a separate tab and not have this tab connected to AppSheet. That's definitely an option, but I would say if you can do the expression in AppSheet, I would suggest doing an AppSheet.
Yeah.
If you do have the formula inside of here, make sure that you turn editable. Like, make sure that's not editable within AppSheet, because we don't want AppSheet filling in the value. And then, yeah, that's my suggestion for formulas.
Nice.
But I guess the last thing I'll leave it on before we switch over is within having a Google Sheet connected to an AppSheet having connected to an AppSheet app. One of the things to keep in mind is that you want to build the user experience of your application to be generally a better experience than using the Google Sheet. And when you're constantly going to the Google Sheet to update values, that is, use that as a reminder to improve your app, to get a little creative on your user experience to make your app better. Because whenever you're constantly making changes within the Google Sheet, you're missing out on things that are being calculated, like app formulas that aren't running because they're not updated inside the app. You're missing out on virtual columns. You're missing out on validation, and maybe like logic of like this column should be hidden unless it's this type of project. Like we don't need this column filled out unless it's this type of project. And so if you're constantly filling out in here, you are putting yourself at risk of making a change that is incompatible with the configuration of your app. And so my challenge to you guys is, if you guys just have the urge to constantly make data changes inside the database, my urge is to make your app more intuitive to do that feature. But yeah, obviously some operations are better to be done in like SQL and stuff, and you're going to want that. But yeah.
Nice. Sweet. Thanks, Cam. That was great. I always love learning something new about database design and what we can, we both hit remove at the same time. What we can do to make our apps run a little bit better, and have a better user experience in the long run, and set up the foundation is really the first part of that. It'd be cool to talk about metadata next week, like created date and time, and or created at, created by, stuff like that, and like what columns we recommend there. So stick around for next week, and we'll probably be talking about that. Okay, so some free resources for you guys. If you haven't downloaded them already, head over to the Chrome store, Chrome extension. We have our AppSheet toolbox. It's free and available for you to use, and that helps with your AppSheet expressions and snippets. And then AppSheetTrain.com is where you can get access to these live streams straight to your inbox, and we have blogs and articles and a bunch of free resources over there as well. If you enjoy this content, it helps us out a lot if you give us a like and subscribe. And then that way you get notified when we have another video coming out or another live stream. And then you can register for our live streams at appsheettraining.com/live stream. And those, as we're coming out with them, you'll get notified to register. And then if you register for them, you'll get them straight to your inbox. And then I already told you guys, don't forget to sign up for appsheettraining.com. And then if you do need support for your own apps and you can't find the specific answers online or through the free resources, book a tech talk with us. I'm usually on those and I can work through any workflow that you're currently working on, see if we can help support that. And then if you do need that one-on-one support in terms of services, we have developers ready to help you out there. But with that, thank you guys for hopping on today and watching the live stream. Thank you, Cam, for the tutorial. And we will
For
see you
sure.
guys next week. Y'all have a great one.
See you guys.